Halo Reach and Rogue One, a Star Wars story, are often remembered for the same reason. They're dark, tragic stories built on sacrifice, and that reading isn't necessarily wrong, but I think it stops one layer too early, because sacrifice isn't what these stories are really about. Sacrifice is just the cost. What Halo Reach and Rogue One are actually exploring is how hope is created, preserved, and eventually passed on, even when the people who earn it never live to see the victory themselves. To understand why, we need to look at how both stories are structured, because that structure is doing far more work than it seems. Interestingly, they're both prequels to critically acclaimed franchises with complete, well-established futures, and that context matters. In Rogue One, none of its central characters appear anywhere else in the Star Wars saga. Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor and the rest of the team simply don't exist in the future of this universe. So before the story even truly begins, the audience understands that something happened here, and more importantly, that something has removed these people from that future history of Star Wars. Halo Reach is even more explicit, from its marketing to the absence of Noble Team and Noble Six in future Halo stories. The game plants seeds of doubt early to the team's success and whereabouts. That doubt is reinforced immediately when the game opens, with Reach already on fire, and Noble Six's helmet lying in the shattered dirt. Before you ever even pick up a weapon, the game tells you the truth. Reach falls, and Noble Team does not survive. This is not a story about saving the planet, but rather it seems like a story about sacrifice. In both cases, the tension isn't whether things go wrong, it's when they go wrong, and more importantly, how do they get here. This distinction matters because it allows both stories to do the same crucial thing early on. They keep you moving, they keep you engaged, and most importantly, they let you believe there's still hope for these characters that you're becoming attached to. For example, in the early portions of Halo Reach, the tone is almost deceptively heroic. Noble Team wins battles, you push Covenant forces back. This is shown clearly when you drive the Covenant off Sword Base and destroy the Corvette, when you take down the teleportation spire in Tip of the Spear, and especially when you destroy the Long Night of Solace. There's a genuine sense that your actions matter and that maybe if you fight hard enough, Reach can in fact be saved. Rogue One follows a similar rhythm. Jyn Erso becomes involved with the rebellion as they search for her father. There are both successes and failures along the way, including the death of her father, but the momentum builds in the background as the threat of the Death Star continues to loom. You see the battle station finish getting built, and then you also see it get test fired on the planet that Jyn and the squad are on, which leads to a real sense of urgency and a real sense of danger that this is a very deadly weapon that needs to be stopped, which adds a sense of tension and fear with the main cast. But unlike Halo Reach, the theme of hope is present almost immediately, not as a conclusion, but more as a possibility, and not just for the story, but for those fractured, troubled characters as well. The audience is allowed to believe that this could work and that maybe this team will make it out alive. These early victories aren't lies, but they're rather necessary illusions, because both stories only work if they get the audience to buy in, to believe, before they can take that belief away. And when that turning point arrives, it changes everything. In Halo Reach, that pivot happens immediately after the destruction of the Long Night of Solace. What initially feels like a bittersweet victory reinforced by George's sacrifice aboard the ship is completely undone almost instantly when the rest of the Covenant fleet arrives. The reinforcements then start laying waste to Reach, turning what was already a dire situation into an inevitable one. Everything Noble Team accomplished up to that moment wasn't victory, but it was actually a delay. From here on, the story stops pretending and it stops pulling punches. Cities burn, civilians are hunted and slaughtered in the streets. You fly through collapsing skyscrapers as Covenant ships glass the planet in real time. The realization isn't subtle. Reach is lost and you're only beginning to understand the cost. Rogue One, on the other hand, withholds that realization until much later. For most of the film, survival still feels possible. The mission is dangerous, but not entirely suicidal, at least not yet. That illusion finally collapses when the team fully commits to the Scarif operation alone. One ship, no backup, and no official support from the rebellion. From that moment forward, survival stops being the goal, and completion of the mission does. That being, getting the Death Star plans into the rebels' hands, no matter the cost. This is the key structural difference between these two stories. Halo Reach reveals inevitability reality early and asks you to live inside it. Rogue One withholds inevitability until the end and asks you to accept it all at once. But despite that difference in timing, both stories are moving toward the same destination. They strip away the illusion of victory and replace it with something heavier, the understanding that victory may only come through loss. And once that realization sets in, both narratives shift into their final phase: sacrifice. If structure is what binds Halo Reach and Rogue One together, then sacrifice is what people remember most. On the surface, both stories appear to be about people laying down their lives for something bigger than themselves, for duty, for belief, and for the mission. But the way each story handles sacrifice couldn't be more different, and those differences matter. In Halo Reach, sacrifice is deeply personal and often cruelly ironic. Each member of Noble Team is taken almost as soon as you begin to understand who they are, and the way they die often runs counter to the role they play within the team. George is the clearest example. He loves Reach. He talks about it constantly. He wants to die defending it. And yet, when his moment comes, he doesn't die on Reach at all. He sacrifices himself alone in space, believing he's just saved the planet. His death is heroic, but it's also tragically misinformed. He never gets to see that his sacrifice was only the beginning of the end, and that Reach would fall no matter what. Kat's death is even more brutal because it's totally mundane. She's the strategist, the brains of the operation, the one you expect to survive, and yet she dies because of a series of small human mistakes. She patches Noble Team into a unsecure frequency, alerting the Covenant to their position. She doesn't have her helmet on, which leaves her temporarily blinded when the Covenant begins glassing the city nearby. That momentary disorientation causes her to miss the elevator button, and that split second is all that it takes. That cascading chain of human error gives an elite zealot squad the opening they need to take a shot, and they do, and they end up sniping her and killing her instantly. The irony is devastating that the smartest member of the team is killed by a shot to the head. No heroics, no last word, just absence. And from that moment on, the game's tone hardens permanently. Jun doesn't die, but he's removed from the story, sent away with Halsey and separated from the team. His fate is unknown. Even survival comes at the cost of disconnection from your team. Carter's sacrifice follows next. He's mortally wounded, and he does what leaders do. He protects his team and ensures the mission can continue. He takes his Pelican and crashes into his Scarab to clear the path forward, allowing Emil and Six to reach the Pillar of Autumn. It's duty distilled into one final decision. And then there's Emil, maybe the most ironic death of them all. He presents himself as fearless, edgy, violent. His helmet bears a carved skull. He wields knives and shotguns, and he looks like somebody who's ready to die. And yet when his moment comes, it almost feels like a sort of projection. He stays behind to man the Mac gun, but is ambushed by that same elite squad that killed Kat, and goes down in close quarters by being stabbed through the abdomen with an energy sword.
Who's next? I'm ready! How about you?
It's a very powerful line, but it doesn't sound like certainty. There's a slight hesitation in his voice as he exhales, and sounds like someone trying to convince himself that he's ready. The man most associated with death may also be the one who's most afraid of it. Even the irony of his weapons isn't lost. The close quarters fighter dies by a blade. And finally, there's Noble Six. From the beginning, Six is told to leave the lone wolf mentality behind and become part of a team. And when the end comes, the lesson is complete. Six stays behind to ensure that the Cortana fragment escapes Reach, knowing full well there's no extraction coming. It's the ultimate team move, having learned to fight alongside others. Six then sacrifices himself so another team can win in the future. The brutal irony of Six's death is that by learning to be a team player, he's then ultimately left to face death alone. Six dies not in victory or glory, but ensuring someone else gets away. Every sacrifice in Halo Reach feels personal, unfair, and unnecessarily cruel, and that's intentional. The game wants you to feel the cost, and I think it totally succeeds. Rogue One handles sacrifice differently. Where Reach isolates its characters, Rogue One unites them. The Scarif team forms a found family bound not by loyalty to a government, but by a shared purpose. Their call sign, being Rogue One, becomes their identity. And when they commit to the Scarif mission, they do so fully aware of what it likely means. Their sacrifices aren't ironic, but they're deliberate. Bodhi Rook reorients the communication tower, fully aware that doing so exposes him to Imperial fire. Chira Imwe walks calmly through blaster fire, trusting belief rather than survival. Baze Malbus follows him, laying down suppressive fire until there's nothing left to protect. Each death pushes the mission forward. Cassian Andor and K2SO and Jyn Erso find their way to the transmission tower. K2SO is lost holding the line, and the plans are eventually uploaded. Director Krennic is eliminated, and Cassian and Jyn know they will not escape. When the Death Star fires, they don't run, but they hold each other on the beach as the wave of fire consumes them. They know the cost when they began, and that's the difference. Halo Reach shows sacrifice as something that happens to you, sudden, unfair, and often out of your control. Rogue One shows sacrifice as something you choose, fully aware of the outcome. Both approaches are devastating. Both are effective, and both leave the audience with the same emotional residue, that being loss. But sacrifice, as powerful as it is, isn't the final word. Sacrifice explains the cost, but not the meaning. Neither story ends by asking you to mourn the dead. They end by asking you to understand why those deaths mattered. And that's where these stories are actually going. If sacrifice is what defines the emotional weight of Halo Reach and Rogue One, then hope is what gives the sacrifice meaning. Halo Reach is especially careful about how it uses hope. It never announces it as a theme, it never names it outright. Instead, the game spends almost its entire runtime convincing you that Noble Team's sacrifice may have been for nothing. The final moments of Noble Six's story are chaotic, violent, and overwhelming. The music is heavy and oppressive. The imagery is brutal. Six dies alone, surrounded in a graveyard of fallen Spartans with no victory in sight. Everything about that moment tells the player that they failed, and then the game changes its tone.
It didn't take long for Reach to fall. Our enemy was ruthless, efficient, but they weren't nearly fast enough. For you had already passed the torch, and because of you, we found Halo. Unlocked its secrets, shattered our enemy's resolve. Our victory, your victory, was so close. I wish you could have lived to see it. But you belong to Reach. Your body, your armor, all burned and turned to glass. Everything. Except your courage. That you gave to us. And with it, we can rebuild.
The timeline jumps forward. Grass grows where glass once burned the planet. Dr. Halsey speaks not of loss, but of courage, of how close they came to victory, and of how that victory was made possible by those who never lived to see it. The music swells. It's no longer oppressive or mournful, but it's hopeful. Halo Reach doesn't frame hope as optimism, but it frames hope as continuation. Noble Team didn't win the war, but they made winning possible. Their sacrifice wasn't validated in the moment, but it was validated by the future. Hope is not presented as an emotion, but as an outcome earned through courage. Rogue One approaches hope very differently. Where Reach keeps hope close to the chest, Rogue One wears it openly. Hope is spoken aloud, it's repeated. Jyn Erso explicitly tells the audience that rebellions are built on hope, and that the film never shies away from that idea. When the Death Star plans are successfully transmitted, the story immediately shows the baton being passed. Plans eventually reach Leia. Leia escapes into hyperspace, and when asked what those plans represent, she answers plainly, their hope. There's no ambiguity here. Rogue One wants the audience to understand exactly why those sacrifices achieved, and it connects directly into A New Hope to prove it. Couldn't think of something more on the nose than that. Despite the differences in delivery, both stories are saying the same thing. Sacrifice was never the destination, but it was the price of admission. Halo Reach asks you to sit with that loss long enough that hope feels distant and almost theoretical, and then reveals that hope was there all along, but just out of reach. Rogue One gives you hope immediately, loudly, and without hesitation. One whispers it and the other declares it, but both arrive from the same truth. Hope doesn't come from surviving. It comes from making survival possible for someone else. And that's why sacrifice feels like the theme people remember. It's loud, it's painful, and it's unforgettable. But sacrifice alone would leave these stories hollow. What endures is what comes after the idea that courage, even in failure, can change the future. These stories don't ask you to celebrate death, they ask you to understand why it mattered. And that's why they last. Halo Reach and Rogue One are remembered for their sacrifices because sacrifice is the part that hurts the most. It's loud, it's tragic, and it's impossible to forget. But neither story ends there. Noble Team doesn't live to see the war won, just as Rogue One's team doesn't live to see the Death Star destroyed. Their victories aren't immediate and they aren't personal. They exist in the future. They exist in people who never knew their names, but lived because of their actions. And that's what makes these stories endure. Not the deaths themselves, but what those deaths made possible. Hope doesn't come from surviving, it comes from ensuring someone else can. And these stories don't ask us to celebrate sacrifice, but they ask us to understand it. And to remember that sometimes the most important victories are won by people who never get to claim them.